So when we're talking about neurodiversity, what does that mean?
Historically, it's been talked about from a negative perspective. I've been made redundant about 5 times, right? I've been fired a couple of times. Wow. The ND community disproportionately talks themselves down. They're incredible people that sometimes struggle to get out of bed. And therefore, we believe that we can never get out of bed. If those organizations are not going to support you, you definitely need to know what adaptations and amendments you can make to systems and processes from your side.
Where can people go to become the expert in themselves? What resources are out there? Where can people go to start that journey? Hello and welcome to another amazing episode of Open to Work. As always, we are here to help people all around the world in navigating this super challenging job market. And no matter kind of where you are, no matter your background, we want to support you. And it's never been harder. And we really want to make sure that you're in the driving seat with all the information you possibly can to make the best decisions on how to navigate your job search. So without any further ado, I'm so excited to welcome an absolute legend of the industry, Theo Smith. So I've known Theo a little while. I've seen Theo speak. I've met him at events. I've read chunks of his books and listened to a bit of his podcast. He's a neurodiversity consultant and author of Neurodiversity at Work. Theo, it's such an honor to have you on the podcast today.
Brilliant. Really nice to be here. Yes, thank you so much. Always a pleasure. Love podcasts, love sharing the story. Happy to dive into the incredible topic today that we're going to be discussing.
Yeah, and we'll be doing kind of who's hosting who. You have to play as the audience. Now, obviously did the introduction, but I could immediately tell that I'm working with a professional podcaster here. He was almost driving the conversation straight away, like knew exactly what we were going to talk about. He's probably got a list of questions ready to go for me just in case anything dries up. So we'll have to play a game, who's hosting who. Look, we have a really fun landing here that all of our guests absolutely love when we here at Open to Work. And we want to ask all of our guests an interview question. So, as if you were in an interview, Theo, tell us about yourself.
No! The dreaded question about me! Right, this could go on for hours. Get comfortable. In short, early stage of my life was failing significantly within the education system and not really understanding why. And coming from a background of parents who kind of failed as well because they came from massive families, complex families. My mum's dad died when she was in her teens. My dad's sister died when he was in his teens. So a lot of trauma there, and from a low socioeconomic background, that kind of plays through a little bit into your family upbringing. But both my parents went to university as mature students when I was a kid. So one thing that I knew, that even if you had all of this baggage, all of this trauma, all of these challenges, you could kind of go to university at any point. And that's a big thing, because even though I came out of school with no qualifications, formal qualifications, I only actually took 6 GCSEs. My wife still can't believe that I didn't show up to science GCSE or the other ones that I should have shown up to, but I was already not showing up to class. So why am I going to show up to the exam? And then I came out and spent 3 years in college and managed to come out with nothing from there as well. So at no point did I understand this was down to my natural neurological makeup, right? It kind of felt, I was surrounded by people maybe who came from similar backgrounds who didn't go on and do well at school, right? And maybe we were just born into that life. However, then my parents went on to do fairly well. I guess well on the basis of where they come from, right? And therefore, when I did get to the point of 21, where I was working in Minehead in Butlins, I'd been there a year and a half, just wanted to get out of my place where I grew up and for my family because things were challenging. I was challenging. I sat on a fairground ride, operating this ride. And it was just a realization of, oh no, this can't be it for me. It just can't be it. I cannot be sat on this ride for the rest of my life pressing this button. And obviously that played challenging towards my, now I know, ADHD, autistic, dyslexic brain, needing energy to be able to do stuff. So from that position, I changed the narrative on my journey. And I went, why can't I go to university? I was 20, just about to turn 21 in September. So I started applying for university with no formal qualifications, but with a love and passion for the arts. And I managed to get into almost like a community-based university program in Manchester that was affiliated with Manchester University. And it was set up by this guy that wanted to help kids from, I guess, different challenging backgrounds, because I wouldn't say, I had loving parents, right? So that was one challenge that a lot of other people wouldn't have benefited from. But kids who wouldn't otherwise go to university. And I got my degree from there. And that was a life-changing moment. And it gave me something, a piece of paper that actually helped me then, right? Because when I walked into a room, I had a different level of respect, even with all the challenges, all the failures. I now had this piece of paper that came from Manchester University. And I dropped in some sales roles. I was working for some really toxic companies. I talk about this a lot, that the recruiters loved me. They were like, oh, you got a degree, you're this, you're that, you're salesy. Really, I wasn't salesy. I don't like sales. I find it really awkward and difficult. But I came across as being able to talk and share stories. And that bit was really powerful, especially within recruitment. And that, without going on too long about this whole topic, is what led me into a long journey of recruitment. And neurodiversity came to me later on, but that was the beginning of the transformation of my life. That and meeting my lifelong partner, my wife.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think as some feedback, it could be used with some trimming. But there were so many interesting things I wanted to call out from that journey. And one of them was the concept of a paper ceiling. And it's something that James and I have talked about a lot, and I think comes up time and time again, in this kind of idea that, you had to get that piece of paper in order to be respected, in order to get access to jobs that you historically, even though you're the same person functionally, that you weren't able to get access to before. I mean, do you think that we've moved on to a certain extent from that world? And do you still see kind of the same sort of limitations as you look around kind of the job market at the moment and with the people you support?
No, we've definitely not moved on from that place. It's misguided as well, because the expectations of somebody who comes with a degree, they're not right? Because there's all kinds of other privileges. There's people who come out, plenty of people who've come out of Oxford or Cambridge with a degree. And I'm telling you, they are not providing some of these employers with what they expect, right? They're not. And that's not a bad thing, right? But misaligned expectations are a bad thing. Because when we put the emphasis on that piece of paper, we misunderstand the value in the individual who sat in front of us. And just to call out what you said about it could do with some trimming, therein lies one of the challenges that I and many others share. I either share too little or I share too much. I find it really difficult to find the in-between. And I get lost in thought a million times over, which is terrible for interviews.
Let's fast forward a bit then. So what led to you to start your kind of now your neurodiversity consulting business? You've had multiple really important moments in your life as you've gone through your growth journey by the sounds of it, but kind of getting access to universities and then getting your diagnosis of dyslexia seems like one of them. So I'd love to hear that little journey there and where it is today. Alderson James are one of the leading people and talent agencies. Since 2013, they've been responsible for over 1,000 people and talent hires, including one in a company that I used to work at. They helped me hire my head of technology TA. So I know the guys there pretty well. They've been responsible for scaling some of the most innovative companies in the UK and the EU. Also recently just launched in the US. So even folks in your neck of the woods now, James, can get involved for contingent, retained and executive search. And they also now do embedded through AJX. So they can do it all.
I left an organization. I've been made redundant about 5 times, right? I've been fired a couple of times, and I've been made redundant from the same company, same role twice. Might have been slightly different roles.
Wow.
Right. So that there's a whole story around that. Anyway, but you can start to see some of the challenges and complexities around my life journey in terms of my career. When I left one organization, I promised myself I would no longer become isolated within a single organization. I allowed that to happen. Came isolated away from my family because I was spending 3 days a week away from them. And I also became isolated from the rest of the world because I put all my eggs in one basket because of past experiences and a feeling of I needed to make this work. Now, when I left that, I decided to connect with as many people. At that point, I connected with the recruitment events company, which run RecFest as well. And they, because I, in my very direct manner, kind of targeted them and questioned positively, but questioned some of the stuff around what are you doing, why are you doing it, what does it matter? And they invited me to come along and experience some of the sessions with the RO100. I got invited down to Whitstable with 50 resourcing leaders from all different organizations, and I heard the topic of neurodiversity. My mind was blown because I realized this was pre me understanding on the journey of my daughter, they're talking about me, but in a language I've never heard before. And that was fascinating for me. So that was day one. And then everything from there shifted on. I became embedded in different recruitment communities. I got myself out there and I realized this important topic that impacted me and my child wasn't being talked about. So I started talking about it. Started the podcast, got out more, started to try and influence HR leaders and recruitment managers, and pivoted to a HR tech company to head up as kind of their customer excellence sales, because I was fascinated around HR tech and how that may positively impact those who've been maybe marginalized and system impacted. It took over my life. And then about 2 years ago, I had a friend who I work with that said, stop everything you're doing, come over and do this with me. I talk to leaders across the world, and your message needs to get out to a wider audience at the top of organizations. Come, we'll figure something out. I'll help you do it. And kind of that was the point of where it was already happening in my past role. And I found it a bit conflicting around what is my day job versus what is this thing that I want to do. And then I'd written the book. The book won Business Book of the Year award, and it was a finalist of 3 for the biggest learning impact in Europe. And that's why we're sat here today now.
Amazing. So we obviously want to talk about kind of this community, the neurodiverse community, and how like some of the challenges that they may have in getting access to kind of the jobs that are out there and their challenges in navigating this job search process. But I think it's worthwhile starting with a definition. So when we're talking about neurodiversity, what does that mean?
So neurodiversity, very simply, is like biodiversity, right? We have natural variations in the plants, the trees, the bees, animals, the kingdom, whatever, right? We have natural variations in all of those things. We also have natural variations in the human brain, the genome, the way that our brain works, right? Just like a thumbprint, not one of us has the same thumbprint. And actually, I just don't find that thumbprint that complex. We have billions of brain cells. And that's my simple mind saying that, somebody else will tell me that's not the case. Very complex. In terms of its diversity.
We won't get a biologist on as my co-host then for this episode.
but we have billions of brain cells, and it's where there's gaps in some of the in the bookshelves of, and it's very similar in some respects to when we think about dementia. And I've worked a lot in health and social care, right? And it's some of the gaps when we think about the bookshelf, and if we think about the bookshelf being the knowledge, right? And as time goes on, some of those books may go on the different shelves and you go further back in your experiences. For some individuals, like myself, there may be some gaps, but that doesn't mean we're less than, right? Some of those gaps might mean we are quicker, we are faster, we have less stuff that we need to go through and deal with. We can hyper-focus on certain areas. So historically, it's been talked about from a negative perspective, that it is something that needs to be fixed, that it is broken. And from a medical paradigm, right, you go to a GP, they are looking to fix the problem that you've got because you've gone to them with a potential problem, and therefore it's something that's broken that needs to be fixed, rather than a different way of thinking where it may need to be enabled, or maybe you're hitting some current barriers for whatever reasons. Those things we can remove. So we're meant to think the way that we think. We're meant to have the brains that we have. They will adapt and change over time, and they will look differently dependent on our upbringing, trauma, other life experiences, some of the factors that may disable us. All of those things are complex, and they are unique to us. So neurodiversity is all of us, and we think differently, but we've not all been marginalized or system impacted because of the way that our brain works.
That's I love the marginalizing system impact. Let's maybe just start with kind of what rights folks have to kind of request different adjustments to be made. In the UK, there are laws that kind of support, and give you that access to that adjustment. But I'd love you to just speak to that a little bit and where you think the right timing would be to use those adjustments as necessary. We are delighted to be sponsored by Metaview. Metaview is the AI assistant for the interview process. Their AI records and transcribes hiring conversations like interviews, intakes, and debriefs, and then provides a perfectly summarized note of everything that was discussed. That means that you can focus on creating human connections with candidates during calls and save time on the busy work of cleaning up notes after every interview. I've spoken to so many recruiters and recruiting leaders who are loving using Metaview across their organizations. It's saving them time, but it also means that they have more data to make better decisions. So for every candidate and every pipeline, hiring teams can now make confident and informed decisions, and recruiters can finally take control of the interview process. The impact on candidate experience is also massive. Since recruiters don't have to worry about taking notes in the moment, they can really focus on being present and engaged with you. Forward-thinking recruiters at high-performing organizations like Brex, HelloFresh, and Quora are all leveling up their interviews with Metaview. So head on over to metaview.ai/open to work to get started for free on your first 5 calls.
So you have access to work rights. You can apply for access to work funding and support. If you're a young person with an EHCP in the UK, an Educational Health and Care Plan, you can actually apply for a job coach who will go in with an organisation that's bought into the programme and assess the interview process and application process and onboarding process and be able to support you right through it into the job, because we know there's evidence to show ND individuals can do incredibly well at a job, but sometimes they take longer to get through a process and to onboard, understand the technology, but then they might smash it out of the park. However, I would caveat this, right, because there are organisations, because of their size and scale, or because they're an NGO, non-government organisation, or because they're a government organisation, they are really good at getting like the basics ticked off. So they will take names out of applications, right? So that they're not biased against certain names. They will ask if you require an adjustment or a reasonable adjustment or whatever. They will ask if you are disabled, have a disability, and what you require. However, these are data points, and these are data points that can be provided to the government to evidence that they are asking them and what they've done about them. And often these things can be kicked down the road. So they may be able to evidence how many people have said they have a disability, but have they helped those people? I would argue that is not always the case. And maybe help will come, but it will come too late. And then from an individual perspective, you may not benefit immediately, even though you think you might from ticking a box. It's not to say you should or shouldn't. Yeah. It's a personal thing. Lots of people who say you need to fight for your rights, and therefore you need to say what it is that you require to get the help. But a lot of individuals may not have the diagnosis, therefore they don't know how to understand, how to communicate the need. So one of the biggest barriers I see is that tick box should really be how can we best support you at this moment in time?
Yeah.
So if I'm reading something.
So a lot of people really worried about whether or not to self-declare as well, because they're worried that they're not even going to be kind of passively discriminated against. They're going to be actively discriminated against, because people go, I don't know if I can be bothered with this. We've got 7 other candidates who are, equally as good as them, and we don't have to worry about them. And I see that happen so much. I've done a couple of pieces of coaching with folks who are going through that journey as well, and like how to access their rights and ask for help. And it's really challenging line to toe, because there is obviously they can't technically be discriminated against, but the reality is that it is happening at scale.
Court cases have gone through the roof. So, like we rather carrot than stick, but for organisations, it's going through the roof because people are becoming aware that they're being treated badly, and then they're like, "Oh, no, I've had enough." And that is great, right? That people are challenging the status quo, but what we need to come back a few steps for me and go, hang on a minute, are we getting to where we're getting to? We're getting there because individuals do not know how to ask for help because they weren't given the support early on in education. They may not have the support mechanisms in the family. There may be cultural nuances or nuances around gender or other factors that come into play. Then you expect them to say, this is what I need. They don't know what they need necessarily in that point. So think about your whole recruitment assessment process. The organization is worried what to ask and doesn't want to break the law and therefore tick boxes. If they're really good, they may ask some questions around, can I help you? But then you've got a candidate who's like, I reckon I do need help, but I'm worried about asking for help and I don't know what help to ask for. This comes back to, again, around you need to become the best expert in your space about you. And I know that's really challenging, but the more that you can understand your neurological makeup, your trauma, your past experiences, how they interplay with your ability to do your role, with your relationships, this won't just positively impact your day job. Actually, a lot of ND people end up having failed marriages, failed relationships, failed family relationships. It really does impact your ability to be successful as an individual. Why? Because people spoon-fed you kryptonite from very early on. People spoon-fed your parents kryptonite, saying, you need to get that child in line. You need to sort that child out. You're a bad parent. You're not doing right by that child. And then the same it's the same happens to you as a human being. So the ND community disproportionately self-flagellates, right? Talks themselves down. Yeah. They're incredible people that sometimes struggle to get out of bed, like many of us, right? Sometimes struggle to get out of bed, and therefore we believe that we can never get out of bed. And the reality is that, again, it's such a powerful thing that if those organizations are not going to support you, you definitely need to know what adaptations and amendments you can make to systems and processes from your side. What you can ask for as part of that process that isn't, hey, I'm disabled, I don't want to tell you, I don't really know, I'm worried about you knowing, and therefore it's going to put me in a bad position. But more like, you've sent me a lot of content information. Do you have another way that I can access that? I'm much more of a visual person. Are there any videos that I could watch instead? Different parts of that process, being able to reach out and go, can I have a chat with somebody? Or is there a different way that I can do this? Or you have psychometric assessments. Are there any alternatives? Can I speak to the psychometric assessment provider that you use? Do they have any way of us engaging with the site prior to do? Like, some of these are put in place now.
Really technical.
You need to advocate and ask for them is the problem, because they won't readily provide those things often.
I know this isn't this is a recruitment podcast, but I think the thing that resonated with me the most is you becoming the expert in you. And just to touch on that, just like one more minute, and then we'll move on back into kind of the world of candidates, just because I think it's so important to this entire conversation. Where can people go to become the expert in themselves? What resources are out there? Like, how do you recommend that? And maybe this is like a whole podcast in and of itself, and it's not possible to summarize it in a minute, but where can people go to start that journey?
So I read a book by Reid Hoffman and someone else, the founder of LinkedIn, that was called The Startup of You. Actually, interestingly, that was a big shift for me, realizing that, which I mentioned earlier, that I became isolated. And when I was isolated in a company, that I became respected in that company, but that job ended, I had no respect. I had no self-worth. And because I'd been made redundant, just because they were selling the company, but it impacts you, right? So I decided to focus on the startup of me. How do I become the expert of me? The expert of the things that I'm passionate about and interested in? How do I lean into my significant strengths? You can go and do Amanda's Do It Profiler. That's specifically designed for those who are neurodiverse and be marginalized, system impacted, want to understand more about ADHD, autism, dyslexia, dyspraxia. You can do it individually, or you can get your organization to support with that assessment. That helps you understand where your strengths are, where your challenges are, and how they overlap, which is really important, because I may be great at being creative, but I may have a real challenge around working memory. And if I'm always stuck in working memory, I will not be creative. When you learn these things about yourself, you really start to enable yourself to lean more into those strengths and bridge some of those challenges. So you need to research more about cognitive behavior, what is happening from a neurodiversity perspective in the brain, where some of those strengths and challenges, but also nutrition is a massive part. I was getting massive dips through sugar, carbs, and I shifted to a low carb, higher protein diet. It's had a massive impact on my ability to think, process information, and focus. So there are many things combined in our human makeup.
Yeah.
Are exploring all of them in A/B test.
Yeah. No, I think that's a really good advice. We'll try and include all of these kind of resources in the show notes so that you can get access to them and review them at any point. And awesome kind of final kind of way to put this. But I've got one more question for you. So my wife teaches at a high school for kids with neurodiversities, and we've just kind of discussed this, and we've talked about kind of the access and challenges that they have, and some of them are extraordinarily bright people, and some of them are like just pretty good, and they live a normal, like pretty normal life. But if you're talking to them, if you were in the classroom with them, talking to them, they're kind of 16, 17 to 19, what would be your top 3 recommendations for them in getting access to work?
Find the thing that you love doing or you love talking about, the thing that sets your heart alight. And I'm yet to meet somebody, especially ND, where when you turn that on, it is like, boom. Sometimes it's about making animal balloons. Sometimes it's about trains. Sometimes it's about horses. Sometimes it's about anything, right? But if you can, enough young people are not supported to lean into that thing that you cannot shut them up about, and they get onto it, right? So, and it's amazing. It just is like this young person comes alive, understand, or get somebody to help you understand what that thing is and where that light comes from. And sometimes it can evolve and change. High Contrast, one of the biggest music producers in the world in the drum and bass space, had that early obsession around film noir. It ended up becoming electronic music, but it was the same transition of obsession about a very like unique thing that they turned into a very successful career. If you can, as early as possible, find that thing, wow, lean into it 10 times over. The other thing is you will have lots of haters because you were weird, odd, obsessed about this quirky thing that you won't shut up about, right? Ignore the haters. Lean into the people who love to hear about that passion, that wonderful thing. Find those people who enjoy the beauty of the love that you have for that topic and spend more time with them, because they are the great enablers of the future of your success. And finally, just know that there is a world where you can be successful. That world exists here, right? And there is a lot of love for you. Find that love in any space or place that you can, because there are a lot of people who will try and feed you kryptonite, which will disable your ability to sometimes do the most simple of tasks, which completely ruin your ability to feel a sense of self-worth. You do have self-worth. You are incredible. It doesn't mean you need to go into space in a rocket. You can do anything and it will be important because it will add value to humanity, a lot more value than a lot of human beings are wasting their time giving away.
Incredible. Thank you so much. I am absolutely going to be sending this episode to them because it is such an amazing sentiment, and I think relevant not only to the neurodiverse community, but to everyone all around the world. And I don't want to add any more because you just summarized it so well. So thank you for that. Okay, we finish. I almost don't want to ask because you did such a good job in wrapping up there, but we do finish every single episode with an interview question that was left by the previous interviewer. What is a leadership trait that you admire, and what have you done to strengthen this throughout your career?
Care. Very simply, care. Leaders who care. My friend, long-standing friend and business partner who's helped me to do what I do, has a podcast called The Leaders Who Care. And it's where leaders are expressing how they care. And the reality is, I've met a lot of founders of organizations, some that become very large and successful, where they didn't care in what they were creating. And they didn't know that that mattered when they were creating it. And that becomes a big challenge for them later on as they grow that business. And I think that's often some of the challenges that we have in society and in organizations when there isn't that care in the things that we do. We can get lost. It can impact our mental health and well-being significantly, but even more dangerous than that, it can start to impact those people that we should be caring for, our family members, our community, and those people who work for us and work hard for us. So care, and I try and incorporate it in every facet and aspect of my life, and I get it wrong all the time, but that is what care is about, right? Care.
I love that, and I think it's interesting because mine would have been vulnerability, and I think it's been really inspiring listening to you speak so vulnerably and so authentically about this topic that I think will help so many people all around the world in navigating kind of their job search and also just kind of their life, as well. But many of the kind of recommendations you're giving here today are not just about helping you find your next job, but setting you up for success in all walks of life as someone who is neurodiverse. Thank you so much, Theo. That was, so moving and so impactful and so useful, which I think are like 3 of the ticks of the box of the Open to Work podcast. And so thank you so much for coming on.
No problem. And just remember, we are all great when we feel great. When we don't feel great, that's when the big challenges come. And I know for a lot of people searching for jobs, they'll be in the not feeling great. Find that moment of greatness, and all the power to you. Really pleasure to come on. Thanks, Matthew.
Amazing. So, the journey will continue on the Open to Work podcast. We'll be with you next week with more amazing insights from recruiting and people leaders all around the world. In the meantime, please write into us at opentoworkpod@gmail.com and share us your thoughts. We want to hear if you have like really interesting questions for our guests or have some kind of insights that you'd like to share about your experience. What's your worst interview experience that you've been through? When have you asked for help and it's been really effectively received? I'd love to hear your journey that you're on. So please write into us. And as always, we're here to help, right? Like that is the mission of this podcast, is to help you in your job search and help and enable you to be successful. And so that can be done by liking and sharing and subscribing. If you have others that you think need help, like and share this with them as well. It's really, really appreciated. And just thank you so much as well for joining us again, Theo, and look forward to seeing you on the circuit soon.
Thank you.